Senior Constable James Adler noticed her on a Tuesday morning in the narrow stairwell between the ground floor and the press office wing. She was sitting on the third step from the bottom, her back against the wall, her knees pulled up slightly, crying without making any sound at all. He almost didn't see her. The stairwell was a cut-through, functional and unglamorous, the kind of space that existed inside Buckingham Palace only because buildings need bones as well as facades. Adler used it twice a day on his patrol rotation. Most staff did. It was the fastest route between the staff canteen and the administrative corridor, and at 8:40 in the morning it should have been busy. It wasn't just her. Alina Vazik, 26 years old, junior press aide, 18 months into her contract. Adler knew her the way he knew most palace staff, by face, by routine, by the small patterns that told you who a person was before they ever spoke. She arrived early. She left late. She carried 2 notebooks everywhere, one black, one green, and she always held the door open for whoever was behind her, even if they were 10 steps away. She was not the kind of person who cried in stairwells. He slowed his pace, stopped. She looked up and immediately straightened, pressing the back of her hand against her cheek. The movement was practiced, not the first time she'd had to hide this quickly. Constable Adler, her voice was steady. Accent slight, Eastern European, careful consonants. Sorry, I'll be out of your way. You're not in my way. He didn't move toward her, kept his distance, his posture easy. Rough morning. No, a pause, it's nothing. He looked at her for a moment. Behind her, through the small window at the stairwell's landing, the palace gardens were gray and wet. The internal bulletin had gone out that morning. He'd seen it over coffee, a full paragraph of praise for the communications department's handling of a press situation 3 weeks ago. Photographs, names, a formal commendation from the Lord Chamberlain's office. Her name had not been in it. He hadn't thought about that until this moment. He filed it away now, carefully, the way he filed everything that felt slightly wrong without yet being provably wrong. "All right," he said. "You know where the security office is if you need anything." She nodded. He continued his patrol. But the image stayed with him. The silence of it, the practiced speed of hiding. He'd seen that before, not in palace stairwells, but in other places, in other lives. It was the look of someone who had learned, very recently, that speaking up had costs they couldn't afford. Something was wrong here. He wasn't sure what yet, but he'd learned, across 14 years of palace duty, that the things that felt wrong at 8:40 in the morning rarely resolved themselves by afternoon. The internal bulletin was still open on the canteen notice board when Adler passed it on his next rotation. He stopped this time. Read it properly. The communications department wishes to recognize the exceptional contribution of Senior Communications Officer Richard Calloway, whose swift judgment and creative management of the Hartfield interview situation on the evening of March 14th prevented what could have been a significant reputational incident for the royal household. Mr. Calloway's initiative, composure, and professional instinct reflect the highest standards of palace service. Below the paragraph, a photograph, Calloway accepting a framed certificate from the deputy press secretary. Wide smile, good suit, the kind of man who always had a good suit ready. Adler read it twice, then he stood very still for a moment, staring at the date, March 14th, a Thursday evening. He had been on duty that night. East Wing, press corridor, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. He remembered it because it had been complicated. A scheduled interview with a foreign broadcaster had gone wrong, something in the transcript pre-release, a quotation taken out of context, and the press office had been activated at short notice to contain it before the morning cycle picked it up. He remembered the lights on in the press room. He remembered the sound of keyboards and phone calls. He remembered, specifically, passing the press room door 4 times between 7 p.m. and midnight and seeing the same person at the central desk each time, working, focused, the green notebook open beside the keyboard. That person had not been Richard Calloway. Adler was certain of this the way he was certain of his patrol routes and his shift times and the particular creak of the third floorboard on the East Corridor. He noticed things. It was, as people kept telling him, his job. He went back to the security office and pulled his duty log for March 14th. His own handwriting, timestamped precise. At 1914, he had logged a note about the press room elevated activity, all staff appear accounted for, lights on across full wing. Standard notation. Routine. But there. He cross-referenced the access card records. Every staff member who entered or exited any room in the palace swiped in and out. It was automatic, logged, time-stamped to the second. Richard Calloway's card had been swiped into the press room at 11:52 p.m. He had swiped out at 12:34 a.m. 42 minutes, well after the situation had already been resolved and signed off by the night duty press secretary. Alina Vazik's card showed entry at 6:47 p.m. Exit at 1:09 a.m. 6 hours and 22 minutes. Adler sat with that for a long moment. The numbers were simple. The implication was not simple at all, because implications had consequences, and consequences inside a palace bureaucracy did not fall evenly on everyone. He closed the log, opened it again, read it once more. Then he began to write a separate set of notes, in his own personal notebook, which he kept in his breast pocket and which was not part of any official record. Phase 3, quiet investigation. He did not rush. Rushing was for people who hadn't thought through what they were doing. Adler had spent 14 years learning that patience inside an institution like this was not passivity. It was strategy. Over the next 4 days, he moved carefully. He reviewed the CCTV log for the press corridor on March 14th, standard security review. Nothing unusual about a constable checking corridor footage. The cameras showed what the access records confirmed. Alina Vazik arriving at 6:47, visibly organized, green notebook under her arm. Calloway not appearing until nearly midnight, when the corridor was already quiet. There was more. At 9:23 p.m., the footage showed Alina on the phone at the press room window, packing the length of the room while she talked. At 10:11 p.m., she was at the central computer typing. At 10:47 p.m., the deputy night press secretary, a woman named Carol Mathers, entered the room and spoke with Alina for 11 minutes. Mathers nodded several times, shook Alina's hand once before leaving. Carol Mathers had signed off on the situation resolution at 10:59 p.m. The paperwork attributed the resolution strategy to the communications team generally. It named no individual. Calloway had arrived 90 minutes after that. Adler watched the footage of his arrival, confident walk, jacket on despite the hour, stopping to speak with the security officer on the door for a few minutes before entering. He had looked, in the footage, like a man arriving to survey work already completed. Adler's notebook was filling up. Dates, times, card numbers, camera references, cross-referenced against the commendation's specific claims. The praise had mentioned swift judgment and initiative. Both of those phrases, matched against the timeline, described Alina Vazik's evening, not Calloway's 42 minutes at the end of it. The question was not what had happened. The question was what to do about it, and more importantly, what doing something about it would cost the people involved. Phase 4, confronting the pattern. He started asking questions sideways, the way you did when you didn't want to signal what you were actually asking. Conversations in the canteen, in corridors, in the 5-minute gaps between patrol rotations. He talked to Michael Reese, a senior security officer who'd been at the palace for 22 years, mentioned Calloway in passing. Reese had made a small, almost imperceptible sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "That one," he said, and left it there. He talked to Sarah Okonkwo, a senior housekeeping supervisor with no reason to be political about anything. She'd mentioned, unprompted, that a young woman from the events coordination team had left her post 2 years ago after a project she'd managed entirely alone had been summarized in a report under someone else's name. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. He talked to David Park, a junior IT technician who maintained the palace's internal communication servers. Park had gone quiet for a moment when Adler mentioned the March 14th situation, then said, carefully, "The emails from that night are still on the server if anyone ever needed to check the chain." He hadn't elaborated. He hadn't needed to. And then there was the moment in the East Corridor on a Thursday afternoon when his supervisor, Chief Inspector Graham Watts, had caught him reviewing the CCTV log at the security desk. Watts had looked at the screen, looked at Adler. That's the press wing. March footage, routine review. "The press wing," Watts repeated, "is not your department, James." It was the third time in 4 days that someone had said some version of that sentence to him. The phrasing changed. The message didn't. "Stay in your lane, this is not your territory. You are security. You watch doors. You do not watch people." He nodded pleasantly and closed the footage window. But he kept his notebook in his breast pocket, and his notes kept growing. Phase 5, Alina's disclosure. He chose his moment carefully. Not the stairwell. Not anywhere near the press office. He waited until he saw her in the staff garden on a Friday lunchtime, sitting alone at the far bench with her green notebook and a cup of tea going cold. He approached from the side, gave her enough time to see him coming, sat down at a comfortable distance, did not speak immediately. She spoke first. "You've been looking into something." He turned to look at her. She was watching the garden, not him. Her hands were wrapped around the cup. "What makes you say that?" he asked. "You changed your patrol route on Wednesday. You walked the press corridor 3 times in one shift." She paused. "I noticed things too, Constable Adler." He was quiet for a moment. Then, March 14th. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she was still looking at the garden. "I signed a standard confidentiality agreement when I joined. My visa status is tied to my employment contract. If my contract ends," she stopped. "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said. "I'm asking you to tell me what happened, just to me. Right now, nothing recorded." A long silence. A pigeon landed on the path in front of them and regarded them both with complete indifference. "The call came in at 6:30, she said finally. "Richard was supposed to be on duty. He wasn't available. I was told to handle the initial containment while they reached him." She turned the cold cup in her hands. "I knew the file. I'd been working on the Hartfield brief for 2 weeks. I knew every line of that transcript, every potential pressure point." She had called the broadcaster's UK liaison directly, had negotiated a 24-hour hold on the contentious segment, enough time to prepare a formal response, had drafted the response framework herself, sent it to Carol Mathers for approval, had it signed off and distributed to the relevant desks by 10:45 p.m. "Richard arrived at midnight," she said. "I briefed him on what had been done. He said well handled. He took the briefing document I'd prepared and sent it to the press secretary the following morning as a summary of his team's response." A small pause. "His team. Did you say anything?" "I mentioned to Carol Mathers that I'd drafted the response." Her voice was very level. She said she'd noted it internally. That was 2 weeks before the commendation was published. Adler looked at his hands. Mathers had noted it internally and then said nothing when Calloway's name appeared in the bulletin. The internal note existed somewhere, buried. "Has this happened before?" he asked. "To you?" She said nothing for long enough that the answer was clear. Then quietly, "Once before, smaller. I told myself it was an oversight." He nodded. He did not make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He stood up, straightened his jacket. "Thank you," he said. She looked up at him for the first time since he'd sat down. Something in her expression, not quite hope, too guarded for that, but something adjacent to it. The look of a person who has learned to keep the door closed but hasn't forgotten there used to be windows. Phase 6, the evidence package. He spent 6 days building it. Systematic, methodical, the way he'd been trained to compile incident reports. Fact first, inference second, emotion not at all. Access card records for March 14th, printed and annotated with timestamps. CCTV stills from the press corridor, 7 images, each time-stamped, each showing the occupants of the press room at specific points through the evening. His own duty log entry from 1914. Carol Mather's sign-off paperwork from 10:59 p.m., which he'd requested through normal records channels on the basis of a routine security audit. Nobody questioned it. David Park had quietly confirmed that the email chain from that night showed Alina as the originating sender of the response framework, timestamp 10:31 p.m. Calloway was CC'd on one email, sent at 12:47 a.m. After his arrival, after the resolution, a brief acknowledgement to the press secretary that the situation had been managed. There was one more thing. The night cleaner who worked the press corridor was a man named Arthur Good, 61 years old, 18 years at the palace. Adler had spoken with him over 3 short conversations, always in passing, always casual. Arthur had been cleaning the corridor on March 14th. He remembered the night clearly, because it was unusual. The press room had been occupied so late, and the young woman inside had been so focused that she hadn't noticed him cleaning the window panel beside the door for 20 minutes. Arthur had given Adler a handwritten statement, 3 paragraphs, clear, specific, dated. He'd signed it without hesitation. "I'm 61 years old," Arthur had said simply, "and I've been invisible in this building my entire career. I know what invisible looks like." Adler read that line twice before he put it in the folder. The folder was thin, but it was dense. Every page cross-referenced every other page. There was no gap in it, no claim that wasn't supported by at least 2 independent sources. He'd built it the way he built everything, quietly, completely, without announcing himself. He sat with it for one evening before he decided what to do next. Phase 7, the bureaucratic wall. He took it to Watts first. Professional obligation, you went up the chain before you went around it. That was the rule, and he respected rules even when he suspected they wouldn't help him. Watts looked at the folder for 90 seconds, closed it, pushed it back across the desk. "This is a personnel matter, James. HR and communications governance, not security jurisdiction." He paused. "I'd strongly advise you to consider whether this is a hill you want to make difficulties on." He took it to the palace HR liaison, a woman named Patricia Hume, who listened to him for 8 minutes with an expression of professional neutrality before explaining that without a formal complaint from the affected party, there was no process she could initiate. He mentioned Alina's name. Hume said that she would need Alina to file directly. He explained Alina's visa situation. Hume said she understood the concern and would make a note. He took it to the head of security, Deputy Commander Roy Finch, who was more direct. "Calloway's been here 12 years. He's well regarded by the press secretary's office. You're a constable with a folder of CCTV stills and a statement from a cleaner." He wasn't unkind about it. He was honest. "That's not going to move anything, James. Not here." 3 doors, 3 different versions of the same message. "You are in the wrong place. This is not your department. Let it go." He walked back to his station, stood at his post, watched the corridor, thought about Arthur Good's 3 paragraphs, thought about Alina's hands around a cold cup of tea, thought about the look on Calloway's face in the photograph on the notice board, the wide smile of a man who had never once worried about whether his name would appear in the right places. He did not let it go. Phase 8, the leak and the crisis. It moved fast after that, the way things moved fast when they'd been pressurized too long. On a Monday morning, Adler was told by Watts that a journalist from a national broadsheet had contacted the palace press office asking about internal attribution disputes and credit irregularities in the communications department. Nobody knew who had talked. Adler hadn't, and he was reasonably certain Alina hadn't. She had too much to lose. Arthur Good was possible, but unlikely. More probably, someone in the chain of people Adler had spoken to had mentioned it to someone else. And palace walls, for all their thickness, conducted gossip efficiently. What happened next was worse. By Tuesday afternoon, Alina had been called into a formal meeting with Richard Calloway and the head of communications, a man named Stuart Birch, regarding a complaint about her conduct, specifically that she had allegedly shared confidential press materials with unauthorized personnel. The complaint had been filed that morning by Calloway. Adler heard about it through Sarah Okonkwo, who had heard it from a friend in administration, who had seen Alina walking toward Birch's office looking very pale and very composed in the way that people looked when they were terrified, and had decided composure was the only armor available. He checked the time. The meeting had started 11 minutes ago. He sat down at the security desk, opened his notebook, and wrote 3 lines. Then he closed the notebook, stood up, and walked directly to the office of the Deputy Private Secretary. Phase 9, Sir Leonard and the Reckoning. Sir Leonard Howe was 73 years old, had served 5 monarchs across a 50-year career, and was universally described by palace staff as either formidable or terrifying, depending on which side of a conversation with him you'd been on. He wore his suits the way old buildings wore their brickwork, as if they'd grown there naturally over time. He did not like surprises. He did not like disruption. He disliked dishonesty more than both of those things combined. His secretary, a composed man named Philip, looked at Adler with polite alarm when he appeared at the outer office door. "Sir Leonard is between meetings, Constable. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Adler said. "I have a folder." He was made to wait 17 minutes, which he considered reasonable. Then Philip appeared at the inner door and held it open. Sir Leonard was at his desk reading. He looked up without hurrying. "Constable." He said it the way he probably said everything, not as a greeting but as an identification. "Philip tells me you have something that requires my attention directly, rather than through your chain of command." "Yes, sir, my chain of command has seen it. They declined to act." A pause. "Sit down." Adler sat. He placed the folder on the desk. He did not push it across, he waited. Sir Leonard looked at it for a moment before reaching for it. He opened it slowly. He read the way Adler imagined he read everything, completely, sequentially, without skipping. He turned each page with the same deliberate movement. He did not react visibly to any of it, but he did stop on Arthur Good's statement and read it twice. When he finished, he closed the folder. He looked at Adler across the desk with an expression that was entirely unreadable. "How long did this take you to compile?" 6 days, sir." "And you're aware that a meeting is currently taking place in Stuart Birch's office, in which a formal complaint is being pursued against the young woman in question?" "That's why I came now, sir." Sir Leonard was quiet for a long moment. Outside his window, London went about its Tuesday afternoon without any awareness of what was happening in this room. Then he picked up his telephone and made 2 calls. The first was to Stuart Birch's office. It lasted 45 seconds. The second was to the palace's legal compliance officer. It lasted 3 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at Adler again. "The meeting has been suspended. The complaint will be reviewed by compliance, not by Mr. Birch's office." He folded his hands on the desk. "I want to be precise with you, Constable Adler. What you've brought me is not comfortable. Institutional corrections of this kind are disruptive. They attract attention, and they require people in senior positions to acknowledge that they failed to prevent something they should have caught." "Yes, sir." "I am also aware," Sir Leonard continued, "that they are necessary." He stood. "Leave the folder, go back to your post. I'll handle what comes next." Adler stood, straightened his jacket. He was at the door when Sir Leonard spoke again, without looking up from the folder. "You were told, I imagine, that this was not your department." Several times, sir. A pause. Everyone who told you that was wrong. Phase 10, correction and consequence. It moved with a speed that surprised Adler, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Sir Leonard Howe, it turned out, was the kind of man who, when he decided something needed doing, did not treat the doing as a process to be managed. He treated it as a fact to be executed. Within 48 hours, compliance had reviewed the email records, the access logs, and Carol Mather's internal note, which did exist, buried in a folder marked General Correspondence, timestamped 2 weeks before the commendation was published. Mathers was interviewed. She confirmed what the document showed. She said quietly that she had assumed the matter would be corrected before publication. She had not followed up. She said she wished she had. Richard Calloway was called to a meeting with Sir Leonard and the head of Human Resources on a Thursday morning. Adler was not present for it and did not need to be. He knew it had happened because Calloway did not appear in the press corridor that afternoon or the day after. His access card was deactivated on Friday. His personal items were collected by Building Services the following Monday. 2 prior incidents surfaced during the compliance review. A project management credit from 14 months earlier, a junior events coordinator whose strategy document had been absorbed into a senior report without attribution. A communications brief from 22 months before that. A young speechwriter's framework that had been submitted under a departmental header that erased her name entirely. Both women had left the palace within 6 months of their respective incidents. Neither had filed a formal complaint. The internal bulletin published a correction on the second Friday. It was precise and unambiguous. It named Elena Vazek as the individual responsible for the identification, containment, and resolution strategy of the March 14th press situation. It included a formal commendation from the Lord Chamberlain's office, not a revised version of the previous one, but a new document, separately issued. It was posted on the notice board in the staff canteen, directly beside the space where the original had been. New attribution protocols were implemented across all departments. Every project summary, every departmental report, every commendation submission now required a verified contribution log signed by the relevant night duty officer. The security office, Adler's department, the one that was not supposed to be involved in any of this, was named as the verification checkpoint for after-hours contribution records. Adler read the protocol document once and said nothing to anyone about it. But he did, quietly, allow himself a single cup of coffee in the canteen that afternoon, sitting at the table nearest the notice board, reading Elena's name in print and finding it looked exactly right there. Phase 11, Emotional Epilogue. 3 weeks after the correction was published, Elena Vazek briefed a room full of senior staff on the communications department's new media response framework, a document she had been formally asked to develop and present. Adler was not in the room. He was in the corridor outside it, on his patrol, moving at his normal pace. But the briefing room had a long window panel beside the door, the same kind that Arthur Good had cleaned while Elena worked inside on March 14th. Adler slowed as he passed it, looked in for a moment. She was standing at the front of the room. The green notebook was on the table beside her, but she wasn't looking at it. She was speaking clearly, precisely, without apology to a room of people who were listening, really listening. The deputy press secretary was in the front row, leaning slightly forward. Carol Mathers was in the third row, watching with an expression that Adler couldn't read from the corridor but which seemed at least to be paying close attention. Elena looked confident, not performed confidence, not the composure she'd worn as armor in Birch's corridor. Something quieter and more real than that. The look of a person who had been seen, finally, and was learning to stand in the light without flinching. Adler moved on. He had a corridor to cover. She found him at the end of his shift in the east stairwell, the same one where he'd first seen her, crying without sound on the third step. She was not crying now. She was standing with her green notebook under her arm and her coat buttoned against the autumn chill coming through the stairwell window. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, properly. "You don't need to." "I do." She looked at him with the directness of someone who had decided to stop softening things she meant. "You had no reason to look into it. It wasn't your department. You were told that repeatedly." "I was." "Why did you keep going?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to think about honest questions. "Because I was there that night," he said. "I walked past that room 4 times and I saw you working. And then I read a bulletin that said someone else had done what I watched you do." He paused. "I can't unwatch something. Doesn't work that way." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something he didn't expect. "There were 2 others, women who left before me." "I know, compliance found them." "Are they?" "The compliance office contacted them. There may be further process. I don't know the details." He met her eyes. "Their names are in the record now. That part at least is done." She nodded slowly. The stairwell was very quiet around them, the same functional quiet it always held, indifferent to whatever happened inside it. "Thank you, Constable Adler," she said, "for not walking past." He nodded once. She went up the stairs. He went down them. The 3rd step from the bottom was empty as it should be. He thought about it later. Not that night. That night he went home, made dinner, watched something forgettable on television and slept without difficulty. He was not a man who dramatized things that had already resolved. But later, weeks on, he found himself thinking about it during the quiet parts of his patrol. The long corridors, the steady hours between rotations. He thought about how many bulletins he had walked past without reading carefully. How many names he had seen in commendations and assumed were correct because they were printed and official and signed by someone with a title. The assumption of accuracy in institutions, how deep it ran, how rarely it was examined. Records felt like truth. Publication felt like proof. Neither of those things was the same as what had actually happened. He thought about the 2 women who had left before Alina. Their names were in the record now, but their careers had bent around something that shouldn't have been there, a weight they'd carried silently, and that silence had cost them things that couldn't be fully returned. He didn't know their names yet, though he hoped to. He hoped the compliance process was real and not another layer of official-looking paper over an unchanged reality. He thought about Arthur Good, who had cleaned a window panel for 20 minutes beside a woman working alone in the dark, and had carried that knowledge for 3 weeks before someone finally asked him about it. 18 years of invisibility, and when he was finally asked to be a witness, he'd written 3 paragraphs in clear, steady handwriting and signed his name without hesitating. That mattered. He thought about that more than almost anything else. He thought about the phrase, "not your department," and how reliably it was deployed whenever someone with less power tried to address something that someone with more power had done. It was not always malicious, that phrase. Sometimes it was genuine procedural caution. But it was also, sometimes, a moat, a way of defining the territory of accountability so narrowly that nothing inconvenient could ever cross into it. He had crossed it anyway, and the consequences had been a folder of evidence. A meeting with a 73-year-old man who read everything completely, and a correction in a staff bulletin that would sit in the palace records for as long as the palace stood. Not nothing, not everything either, but something real. He thought about Alina in that briefing room, speaking without apology to people who were listening. That image stayed clearest. Not the investigation, not the confrontation, not the folder. Just a person standing in a room being heard after a long time of not being heard. He had not done it for recognition. He had done it because he had watched something happen and could not pretend he hadn't. Because the duty logs were there and the timestamps were there, and the truth was just sitting in the records, patient and unread, waiting for someone to look. The looking was the thing. It was always the looking. The pause before you decided it wasn't your department. The moment you chose to read the bulletin carefully rather than absorb the name at the top and move on. In 14 years at the palace, he had opened a great many doors. He had checked a great many credentials. He had walked a great many corridors at the same steady pace, watching for the things that were wrong or missing or slightly off from what they should have been. He had never thought of that as anything other than his job. He thought now perhaps it was more than that. Not heroism, he had no patience for that word, which inflated ordinary attention into something requiring celebration. Just a form of witness. The decision to see clearly and then to say, simply and without drama, "This is what I saw." The bulletin with Alina's name on it stayed on the notice board in the staff canteen for the standard 2 weeks. Then it was taken down and replaced with the next one, as all bulletins eventually were. But the record beneath it, the access logs, the email chain, the compliance report, Arthur Good's 3 paragraphs, those stayed. Filed, indexed, permanent. The truth as it had actually happened, documented and signed and placed where it could not be quietly removed. That was enough. It was, in the end, exactly enough.